Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much and welcome to our poetry workshop and reading in partnership with the Pollock Library and English Department. We are excited for this innovative reading, which will feature the following poets. I'll read the bios of all poets and then I'll tell you a little bit about the structure for today. First poet is Bilen Nawet, a Seattle-based Ethiopian American poet who immigrated to the United States when she was 10. A mental health therapist by day, poet by night, she discovered poetry was her second language when she read Rumi in a medieval literature class. Bilen has studied poetry at the Hugo House in Seattle, as well as with Denver's Lighthouse writers instructor Joy Routier-Salyer. Her poetry appears in Kweli Journal, the Halcyon, Mom Egg Review, and Genosco Journal. Bilen's debut poetry collection, Plenty, is out from Finishing Line Press. Next poet will be Lincoln McKelvey. Born and raised in Southern California, he graduated from Cal State University Fullerton, one of our alumni, and with a bachelor's and a master's degree in English literature. His poetry has appeared in various journals and anthologies, including Dash Literary Journal, Open Minds Quarterly, Crosswinds Poetry Journal, and Lullaby of Teeth, an anthology of Southern California poetry. He is the author of This Place Could Be Haunted If I Didn't Believe in Love by Moontide Press. Lincoln currently works as a freelance writer, editor in Los Angeles, California. The next poet will be Daniel B. Summerhill. He is a poet and performance artist and assistant professor of poetry, social action, and composition studies at California State University, Monterey Bay. He's performed in over 30 states, the UK, and was invited by the US Embassy to guest lecture and perform in South Africa. His work has appeared or is forthcoming in Obsidian, Rust Plus Moth, Button Poetry, Cosmonauts Avenue, Cogs, The Hellebore, and others. His collection, Divine, 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 was published by Oakland-based Nomadic Press and is available for purchase at nomadicpress.org. Our final poet and workshop facilitator is Lynn Thompson. In 2021, Lynn Thompson was appointed Poet Laureate for the City of Los Angeles. Thompson's most recent collection of poems, Fretwork, won the Mark Hawk Press Poetry Prize. A multiple Pushcart Prize nominee, Thompson is the author of Beg No Pardon, winner of the Great Lakes Colleges Association's New Writers Award, and Start with a Small Guitar. Her work has been widely published and anthologized, including in New England Review, Plowshares, Poetry Northwest, Colorado Review, and the Best American Poetry 2020, among others. Thompson serves on the boards of Cave Canem and Los Angeles Review of Books. So here's how the next hour and a bit will alternate between what will go. We're going to alternate between readings and poetry sprints. For our poetry sprint, I'm going to ask you to write as quickly as you possibly can for about 2 minutes in response to a prompt on the screen. After 2 minutes of writing, let me see. I pressed the wrong button. Okay. After 2 minutes of writing, you will hear from the poet that created the prompt. After our first 3 poets have gone and the poetry sprints have us warmed up, we'll have a longer writing time with Lynn Thompson before she reads for us. Remember, as you write, these are rough drafts intended to get you thinking in different ways and get you started with new work. This is no time for edits or criticism. Even a line or two or a word is a fine beginning. So stretch your fingers and get ready for this first poetry sprint from Bilen. After the poetry sprint for 2 minutes, I'll invite her to turn on her camera and begin reading for us. So take 2 minutes and write a list poem about 5 times you were in complete awe. So 2 minutes writing about a time you were in complete awe. Notes, words, references. One more minute. Now welcome, Belin Nawat.
To start. Okay. To the daughter in wild denial. If your mother dies when you're 11, you may look for her in other people's mothers or any older woman who shows the slightest interest in you. You may look for her in her sisters who go decades without calling and later speak of their impossible grief by way of explanation and notice of further absence. You may look for her in your stepmothers, especially the one you call mama, who introduces you as her daughter and whose occasional mean streak reminds you, though you never forget, that it's in name only. Years later, you may be surprised when you realize you'd even looked for her in the men you loved desperately. You may look for her in between lines of poetry that fill you up until you burst like a balloon. You may look for her in a stranger, in the mirror, in her handwriting on the back of the photo that you carry around for years. You may look for her forever and everywhere, except in your father, which is the last place she would be. Quality time. My father's in love and I'm angry. I don't know what I want, but what I don't want is the stupid sparkle in his eyes as he video chats with his spell of a wife who is younger than I, which is, of course, how he likes them. Never mind that we're at a restaurant. I make small talk with the waitress, taking my time to order as he picks that moment to give a virtual tour of the place. I smile to keep from yelling at him, to stop neglecting his years the way he neglects his children. When I told a friend that my father is still adjusting to being elderly, she had laughed. Your father isn't aging, he's aging you. I feel as old as God, who seems to never stop aging and never stop loving me. It's like she's right in front of me, eyes dancing and mouth pretending to be bothered by my relentless longing. When she was here, she'd scold me for not being self conscious. My too often and too loud laughter made her cringe and look around apologetically. A heavy rain hit the last summer I visited, and my cliched heart led me to dance in the street on the way to her house. Onlookers seeking cover under various storefronts twisted their faces in disapproval and concern. Ade was in her chair when I arrived. I could tell from her will to be invisible that the gossip beat me there. She tried to pull away when I bent to kiss her. Taking her head in my hands, I planted several kisses on her face and neck. Libigaveri, she said, and I laughed. Then, what use is it advising a fool? Which made me laugh harder. Suddenly, I became aware of how fiercely I miss her and said so. It's you who leaves, she said, before getting up slowly to make me Shahi. Thank you. Should I read one more?
Sure, you can read one more if you have one. We'd love to hear it.
Okay. Um, yeah, I'll read. had it. No. Okay. Um, I'm trying to find it. I'm sorry. It'll be just a second. Clear. Where is clear? Oh, got it. All right. So, clear. In the middle of dinner, my little sister reports her first day of kindergarten was fun, except for the teacher who gave her a brown crayon to draw a self portrait. I said to her, "I'm not brown, I'm black," Rosa says, adding, "She didn't even know that." I feel my father object from across the table. I don't take my eyes off Rosa. She stands up on her knees in her chair, her small body barely able to contain her big ideas. She says that the teacher pointed to her hair to make the distinction between the color black and the brown of Rosa's skin. Instantly, I picture the classroom scene. Rosa glaring at the teacher, unable to argue with a lady who clearly knows her colors. I wait for her to finish chewing a mouthful of chicken, followed by a long sip of water. She loves being the center of attention. I wonder if she knows my heart's in her mouth, anxious that I hadn't been clear enough about the complexities of color and race, and how to tell my father that the moon made me do it. Finally, she says, I said, "Yeah, my hair's black, and I'm black, and my sister's black, and my family's black, so I need a black crayon." She gives a big laugh. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad you read that extra one. That was lovely. I really appreciate your reading. Now we're going to move to another poetry sprint. So let's take some time and stretch out. Go ahead and get started. This is, I'll give you 2 minutes. Write a letter you will never send. Address this letter to someone in your family or community or, or the whole community. In whatever way you define these terms. Get even more creative by writing the letter poem as a list poem and go back to the idea of listing, or by writing as your childhood self. So I'll give you 2 minutes, everything you can jot down about a letter you will never send to somebody in your family. What would that be? One more minute to get everything down you can, a letter to someone you won't send. Lincoln, I invite you to go ahead and read some poems for us. Welcome. Up, you're muted.
There we go. First poem is called A Primer for Siblings. Heat radiates from the floor furnace over which my grandfather sits. Every day, balancing on a grate, this watery-eyed widower chews tobacco, hums Johnny Cash songs, calls and responds to his left-behind life in West Tennessee. Sundays, he ups and chases us, his dentures slick in hand, our screams presaging the white bite of porcelain offered unwanted. Or else he tells stories, and we too sit by the fire. Relatives rise, sparking tender memory. He retraces a great migration, messy miles, stolen land, community fleeced by fraud and suppression, the white sheets in the black night of Reconstruction. In one story, on the family farm one night, the barn began burning with my father's visiting school teacher inside. I grasp at the leap and the flames, the wringing hands and those waiting for her body to descend into what we uphold despite the risk. At home now, in a neighborhood going south, my grandfather warns us not to play too close to the flame, but we're drawn to it. Its otherworldly glow in darkness, how the heat waves hiss and rise. The old home's good bones, our inheritance. Next poem is actually a found poem at LA's original farmer's market. So every line is actually a little snippet from overheard conversation. Well, we better hurry. Tonight, my mom and dad, it's over. A complete stop. Are you ready? I want to find myself outside myself. Can you hear yourself say alpha? I'm not saying you have to. Is he there? Right there. It's right there. Goodbye. My God, that's so annoying. Up on top, I think he's American. Are you registered to vote? Sit down, please. This feeling. I want to go to heaven. You want to go down there? Take me to heaven. We have all the time in the world. So, and on the note of unfound poems, I have a little quick blackout poem that I recently did one afternoon when I was feeling particularly down with everything going on. So just blackout poems, redact everything and leave a little bit. So this is a letter to the community. It says, imagine the challenge of us, a community unwavering, striving, becoming, seeking place, safety, knowing we must remain vigilant. I cannot say this enough. We are, we love, we care. Next poem, Sherbet or Bust. The pot of gold at the end of rainbows is really just sherbet, cupped. Melted color like the ooze of paint tubes packed on ice, winter blushing crimson, budding into a fruit-forward bite that toboggans across taste buds in the bittersweet syllables of oohs and ahs. As an inner city kid, I begged my mom for two things every summer: a cup of icy ambrosia and quarters for coin-operated rides, not grasping that both were an expense. But standing storefront in noonday heat, the sun was a melting scoop of orange out of reach. I sought my fix in 31 flavors like 31 ways to want. Even now, sherbet migraines my brain. more than the milky dreariness of vanilla or rocky road or the devil's kiss of mint chip, more than the more than the fruitless disputes on its spelling and enunciation, because given a chance, it's ice cream on acid, limes and lemons and raspberries, pineapples and oranges, fruit juice and cream and ice, and the awestruck kiss of a goddess. Scooped happiness and its anticipation, like the cloud nine creaminess of a life barreling toward a promise you can almost taste. A dreamy pot of quarters for a shiny ride to all the places you've wanted to go. Bucked around and fed until sherbet spills out in bands of palpable rainbows that puddle on the chin like tears and stick. Kite flying. Dragonflies prospect the surface of a lake, flash panning ochre, orange, tawny bodied and thin winged. The evening sky empties like a dry riverbed where kites stumble, caught up on the promises of flighty clouds. Parents walk around the boundary of the lake, pointing out each hazard to their eager children. How kite strings can catch in the nearest tree branch, or how a rough wave of wind can bring down even the best laid constructions, whirling them like dervishes into the muck of a man-made lake. Back in elementary school, in a scene like this, we caught ladybugs at lunch, chased dragonflies, and I once dared myself to run through the thickest fog, defiant of sky, unsure of where the blacktop would stop, where the brick walls, the wire fences would stop me. I wanted to soar through the deluge of damp air, to know intimately the gravity of flight, to celebrate the attempt as much as the little victories, the failures, the tethered world waving away below my feet. As the kites climb, some fall back to the ground quickly and quietly, but in no time, they're up again, soaring. Others find an ending in a cluster of tree branch, yet sway back and forth as if imbued with gratitude, as if waving. They sway as if they're at least happy to have made the leap, to have added to their cautionary lives this wry victory, as if these colorful prospects know, when unmoored, they'll soar that much higher, filling, dizzying, promise. That's it. Should I read one more, or I think I'm good?
Yeah, thank you so much. We have one more sprint before we bring on Daniel Summerhill. So let's just sprint it out. If you're warmed up now, you're stretched out now. I'm excited to share this last sprint with you. And again, if you let me see, let me bring it up. So think about a time in life when you shared a challenge with friends. We're going to take 2 minutes to just write. When is the time you shared a challenge with friends? What is it that helped you? What do you know now that would have helped you? Write a poem to yourself or write notes to yourself about the challenge and what you know to be true now. So take time as we welcome up Daniel Summerhill to write down as much as you can about a time in your life when you shared a challenge with friends. So we can think about all these notes. We're going to build towards some poems later. In the interest of time, I'm going to put that sprint in the chat to let people keep working on it or tooling with it. It's there for you. And I'm going to invite Daniel Summerhill up to read some poems for us before we welcome Lynn Thomas. Thank you. Welcome.
Word. I'm gonna jump right in. First poem is called Albany Middle School Teaches a Lesson on Entrepreneurship. Our book bags be a black market, meager juveniles brandishing singles behind blacktop filled fingernails and back pockets void of wallets. By 9, at even, Jamel eyes open his second box of Starburst, while Kumi brokers $6 to a sixth grader for the lack of supply and huge demand. Half past noon, our surge comes to a halt when we gather behind the B building to compare profits and crack jokes on Jamel's short shorts. Tuesday through Thursday be the same saga, transactions in the hallways, while Friday be a Sabbath, a space for us to take flight over the basketball courts with our Nikes. On Sunday, Costco be a kingpin that knew we'd never miss a re-up unless Miss Peggy called our mothers in for a meeting to discuss the school's drop in lunch sales. Monday be a chalk talk, our first lesson on the ways our brown bodies aren't allowed to yield the same way other bodies aren't allowed to multiply the same. And the next poem I'm gonna read is very, I guess, timely because the murder of the most recent murder of Dante Wright, and how there was the whole argument of trying to use the taser instead of the gun. It was the same argument that was used when they murdered Oscar Grant, which took place in Oakland, where I'm from, the day after Fruitvale. Because Oscar Grant's killer hadn't been cuffed, a Volkswagen Passat was in flames outside my apartment window because I lived uptown and the Oakland police station was 2 blocks away, and because folks care more about cars than bodies, and because my people know that shit goes up in flame. Because our protest is mistaken for riot and not peaceful, my people's eyes tend to tear. Gas fills our blocks, and because Oscar laid in his own blood, my people lay in front of cars on Interstate 880. Because folks care more about a commute than a community, it's illegal to march on the highway, and because my people know that, they march on the highway. Because mourning is an empiricist in ecstasy, and words often lack sense, the crust of stone in hand and half drunk Molotov cocktail is the greatest feeling, and standoff with blue and black. And because moms would have seen me on TV, I placed the amplifier in my second story window instead. And because music sings in our name, my people sung, "We gon' be all right" on 23rd Street. Cool. So this next poem is called Considering the Defense Production Act. And it begins with a little epigraph. The Defense Production Act gives the president several powers to ensure that the supplies for national defense are produced by US industries and distributed to places that need them. Washington Post. Before bed, I tell my daughter I love her for the 11th time today, and her mouth yields, "Daddy, you're a builder." I take inventory of the day, reckoning the bookshelf I built next to her bed, holding each nail near the head. I consider my grandfather, his unfailing advice, and swing from the elbow once more, like he taught me. I haven't felt the effects of the Defense Production Act except through my grandmother-in-law's hands and all the other grandmother hands that still have breath, how they've stopped manufacturing prayers briefly to manufacture face masks, how in some cultures, mouths don't mouth "I love you." I think how we are made holy, not by our hearts, but through our hands. I press my lips together, take my fingers to her cheek, as if to say, And then I'll end with this last poem, which is called Mama. Mama knows what it's like to behold and not be held. Mama Nancy, who was not my mama, but is the oldest mama I have a name for. In this way, history is young, not because it is young, but because it goes only as far back as we have a story. And I'd like to think memory counts for something. 3 women separate her from my mama, each of them a comma. Each of them should have been a semicolon, but we know genealogy isn't forgiving that way. I'm the son of all 4, and I am told by mama that her earliest recall of joy was being handed a quarter to buy a hamburger and still having 15 cents left over to buy penny candy. This girl, a woman, a mother who has never been to the bottom of the earth, and not that any long haul flight will buy happiness, but being awakened by the unswallowed sun over the Southern Ocean seems like a cheat code for sustained joy. I say sustained in the sense that the sunrise is the only infinite rhythm I've ever seen. This isn't a poem about joy so much as it is a poem about dying without ever knowing it. But mama, you've always stricken me as someone who champions distance over depth, or faith over long suffering. In this way, I suppose joy isn't the antonym to pain, but the antibody. It is 1998, and you have just given me a pink food stamp, enough to buy a zebra cake, Kool-Aid jammer, and 3 packs of now and laters. The walk to the corner store, my faith. The slow skip back home, small joy. Here, my perception of small is grand, enough to get me through the immensity of summer, how my mother summoned its jubilance to share with me its blood. It is 2018, and I think of my trip to South Africa as a metaphor for food stamps. The flight, my faith. The flight, my joy. What I don't deserve, not considered here. The miles between me and the earth, stretched faith, carrying me back home. I search out my window for land, but find nothing green, just blue. Plenty blue to feel small enough to remember my small mama with outstretched hands, waiting for a quarter, for joy, a girl, a woman. Dear mama, your water will come, and the sun will brass knuckle its way out of the ocean with enough triumph to make you feel golden. The ocean is the only constant here. It delivers us all. I'd imagine it'll deliver you too. If not you, your body. If not your joy, your pain. It will carry it in its mouth back to shore like a flood, eager for teeth. Thanks.
Woo! Wow. Thank you all so much. I really do appreciate hearing all of the voices threaded together. Like this is amazing. Like I'm so excited that we've been able to hear all of these voices about family and community come together. And now we reach our final workshop facilitator and panelist, Lynn Thompson. I'm gonna just remove my pen and give it over to her. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Natalie. It's just wonderful to be here. These voices are just stunning. I'm honored to be among them. I'm going to read 7, maybe 8 poems, depending on how my time goes as I read them. And then we'll talk about the strategies in the poems and how they came about and how you can use them in writing your own poems. These first 2 are about brothers, but very different. Relativity, a haunting. This is a confession of pedigree. Each brother drank blood and sugar and grew great wings from his humpback back. Each brother chirped his singular chirp. 1 crow, 1 lark, 2 others, puffin and owl. Most days they exchanged feathers, stymied sharpshooters, flew under a radar not yet invented, were husbands, 2 of them twice, to wives who were not their kind, conch, garden, gray matter, fawn, curl of smoke, the two who got free. The brothers loved differently, indifferently. They hoped to live by the sea, but as it turns out, sea leaks. Flight never took them far from wrought gates. They didn't know their mother until she turned pillar as salt, and let's not speak about their father. They molted for the shortest of long lives, if you believe in contradictory terms, and they lived to inflame purpose. One careless rumor still haunts a febrile clock. I am their sister as duckling. Is it my turn to take off? The day my brothers met Malcolm X, they knew our Antilles bred parents were wary of Black Muslims. Mother gave hijabs a cold one eye when she saw them troubling the innocents on our streets. However, our folks did enjoy the bean pies those bow ties sold outside a branch of America, but not quite as much as the brothers enjoyed meeting Minister Malcolm in the barber shop of the Hotel Watkins, perched majestically, Adams Boulevard, Sugar Hill. The brothers gave up their chairs of favorite barberettes, Angie, Gloria, and the rhythm of old men's playing of the dozens in answer to Mr. X's proposition. I don't want to look like I need a haircut, but also not like I just had one. It was May 1962 when X came to LA to protest the police whose bullet pierced the heart of Ronald Stokes, X's friend, a Muslim, a Korean war vet. His crime, unloading several dry clean suits from a car parked legally near Mosque 27. Malcolm strode into the Watkins the same day he preached, "Nobody can give you freedom. If you are a man, you take it." And everybody knew Malcolm was the man. Many "gotta get my afro oiled and shaped" were intimidated by this Muslim who'd grace a 1964 cover of Jet magazine alongside Cassius Clay, meaning that 2 years after X came, life hadn't changed here much, meaning most Afro-Ams, excuse me, Negroes, sang a blues chorus, emboldened, yes, yet fearful for this preacher. And my brothers revealed more about themselves than Malcolm because they weren't sure what they were allowed to ask him. But maybe their untapped rage rose up, made one brother ask, what should we believe, man? Making Malcolm mourn, "We are a violent people." When the brothers spoke of it years later, I understood Malcolm never fully answered before he took a bullet, 1965. So the question hangs in the same stank air that blew over Stephon Clark. What should we believe? My parents are immigrants from St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and so these poems are for them and about them. A song for two immigrants. I thought I knew you. To me, you were the Grenadines, the Anglican Church, and a cricket match every Sunday. And every Sunday, you were Fort Charlotte, the Vincy Mass, and Blue Tide pools. You were Arawaks sailing into Kingstown Harbor. You were English and French patois. Rainforests, regatta, and a Congo snake, whelk, roti, lobster, and rum. Yet here you are in a yellowing photograph shot in the Mojave or Death Valley, CA, looking like deserters from an American war. Her, every bit the boy, hair slicked, leather jacket cinched at her throat, her tiny foot on the running board of a black 37 Ford coupe. And you, looking nothing less than the black Clyde Barrow, flicking the butt of your Lucky Strike, checking out your boys at play in the dirt, wearing short pants and high tops, everyone looking for all the world as if the Caribbean was a dream, a far yesterday away, and it was, and it's clear, I did not know you. Seed of mango, seed of maize. I saw one of the grandmothers only once in a photograph. Short and sturdy she was, a black Carib with a forehead wide as the sea that kisses Port Elizabeth and a nose broad as the nostrum of Admiralty Bay. Breathing deeply, her breath was fume of coconut and allspice, mango and frangipani, blackbird and blue sky, was the Isle of Bequia. She conjured a daughter, then jinxed another, and they bedeviled 5 daughters between them. And I am one of those, flying fish. The other grandmother I composed from myth and half-told stories. She was a red Cheyenne, scorched earth, much chaste, sported a thick reed of braid pulled off from her forehead wide as Dakota before it was north and south. She hisses warnings across 10, then 10 times 10 more years to a son who reshapes them for me in my dreams, sometimes in my waking. As flute, blue maize, dance of the sun, she comes, crow on the wing, singing up the ghosts. And I am one of those, a ghost singing. Haiku, more or less, for West Indian palates. Curried goat spice. Saute and simmer to dinner, sit ye down. Guinea corn, sorghum, rub ye teeth to make 'em clean. Sorghum, guinea corn. Curry blend, cumin, allspice, paprika, and dark honey. Filet powder from the Gulf Coast. Dried, ground, put into gumbo. Stamp and go. Salt cod cakes take me down to Kingstown. Take me back to home. Mashed bananas, see ye Gibbons Bay. Cook a fiery stew. Serve hot, sweet. Plantain, do not peel. Cut halfwise, brush with oil. Grill or broil. 6 pig's ears, 6 small rolls. Mustardy cabbage, spicy sauce. Serve at once. She named Pamela at birth, speaks to me, says, you think you know who you are. You do not. You think everything's great in your gravy-trained life. Your feet up on the tabaret, sipping fingers of Pernod and blowing smoky O's of Gauloise like you were born to it. You were not. You were born at County Gen, the random upshot of a collision, a urgent virgin, and the back seat of a Studebaker, though everyone knows there was no joy the night you got made. You came into this world on cotton rough from 10,000 washings. The doc showed up late, then spilled a little Maxwell House on the sheets. The nurses yawned. Mama cried for you for 16 hours before her water broke, and she's been in labor for you all her life. But no one came. No one came to see, so in time, Mama just gave you away. But you don't remember that, just like you don't remember me. Me who never got the pretty dresses, never got the vacations at the beach, never sat down with the family to eat lamb and mint jelly on a sunny Easter day. No, you don't remember me. It's as though you were born to the manor, born to speak lousy French and read Edwardian novels in a hothouse, to gad about at high-toned schools, to raise your finger just so the ruby shines. But you don't know who you really are, Miss Don't Remind Me, Miss Given Away 4 times before you were taken for good. Well, you got my blood in your veins, and you ain't no fancy dancer. You ain't no pearls and piety. You ain't no seashell by the seashore, and you sure ain't no evening out at Lincoln Center. You got me in your veins, got my chipped white fence, my regular job, my $39 a night room in Vegas, and this name that ain't gonna be at the end of any poem. But don't worry, my sister, my slip of a pen. I'll never let you forget the night you were born. My name was all you had. Two more. I think I'm doing okay on time. Well, one more. Ebb tide. He said, one day when we are old, we, and his saying so was pure joy. I shocked the system. I'm so sorry. I apologize.
Oh, you're fine. We're back in action.
Okay, I think the computer had heard enough of me. So I don't know if you want to say anything before I make some remarks, Natalie.
No, go ahead. Go right into it.
Okay, so what I wanted to talk to you about was a little bit about the strategy that I used for each of the poems in your own poems. And if there are questions as I'm doing this, Natalie, maybe you can help me navigate them in the chat. I haven't looked to see before I start whether I have anything, but I like that my work was too powerful for Zoom. I don't know if that's true, but the first poem, Relativity, a Haunting, was about my brothers. And when I started to write that poem, I simply didn't know how to write about them as people, or maybe I was intimidated. I don't know. So what I decided was to look for a metaphor for them. In this case, it was the birds, right? And once I started writing about them as birds, and I had to write about their wives, were the wives going to be birds? Were they going to be something else? The poem started to take on a very fanciful tone that I just followed throughout. So if you're having trouble trying to figure out, especially when you write about family, it can be a little intimidating, a little, you don't know quite how to get into it unless you're going to write a straight narrative story. Think about using metaphor to identify a mother, a father, a brother, an uncle, a grandmother, and that will give you an interesting way to think about them and what grows out of those metaphors. So that was the first brother poem. The second brother poem, frankly, was written a lot later, and I think I had better tools to work with. But that one grew out of the fact that one of my brothers told me that he and his other brother had met Malcolm X at the barbershop. And I had known this story for a long time, but the writer in you jumps out at some point. You say, wait a minute, how do I blend personal history with public history? So at first they didn't really remember the details, but I really pushed them about what year was it, what was going on. And that's how I was able to do the research that allowed me to figure out when was Malcolm X here, why was he here, what was he doing, and to in this world that we're living in, and his response that we're a violent people. I really wanted to get both of those things in there. So look for, all of us are living in this world. Part of the reason I think we're all a little flapped today is because we just had a verdict come out. All that, for many people, I think, is, I can still feel the tightness in my body waiting to hear that verdict. But you will have people in your family, you discuss this. So we talked about the two brother poems, and I saw a question about describing my grandmother as a scent. When you described your grandmother's smell, was it from stories or was it from something you heard? I love the detail. That really came from having actually visited the island that my grandmother is from in the West Indies. And knowing what the smells were there. So that kind of came naturally in the poem. So that's how that came about. But the one that I read before that about the song for two immigrants, where I start out by saying, I thought I knew you. That came from a photograph. And I would encourage you all, as you write your poems, look for family photographs and try to find and use photographs that you don't really know the story to, because it will require you to use your imagination in ways that you might not use it if you kind of knew the backstory of it. This particular photograph of my parents, they look like criminals. That's why I put in there that they look like deserters from an American war. And when I asked my mom, she was so matter of fact about it and said, well, that's me and your father. I said, well, were you on the lam or what? You know, so that I was able to kind of imagine what they were doing in this. She said we were on a picnic. They did not look like they were on a picnic to me, but I was able to write that poem in large part by doing two things. One is so you can do a balance thing. The things you think you know, and then when you see some photograph of your grandmother or even a closer relative, but maybe you never saw them, what were they doing in that circumstance? So that's how that particular one came about. The Seed of Mango, Seed of Maize poem. I'm an adopted person. Maybe you could tell that from the later poem that I read. And I wanted to put both sides of my family in one poem. So you may have step siblings, you may have a step parent, there may be some push and pull in your family about who was there from the beginning, from your knowledge, and maybe who came in later, or maybe you're the one that came in later. How can you get those two sides together? So I literally just talked about one grandmother based on what I knew. The other grandmother, I start out telling you, I'm making this up from myth and half-told stories because nobody really knew a lot about her other than that she was Cheyenne, from the Cheyenne Nation. So I kind of made that up. The first stanza is a little truer because I know more about that grandmother, but this was a way to get the two sides of my family together. Let me just stop and see if I'm answering a question. Okay, that was the same question. Okay. All right. Then I read the haiku poem. And that was because the one thing you can always count on that everybody can identify with is food, right? And everybody's family has something that's unique to them about the food, a particular kind of bread or something that family that you think, when you think back particularly on your life as a child, this is what you think of when you think of your mom or your grandmother or your aunt or your sister. So this was really taking a lot of the food references from my mom of what she remembered growing up cooking, and some of the things like the plantain that we can get here and all of that she still cooked, that as I got older, I understood this isn't what everybody is eating. This is something that she brought with her from home. So that's always a rich source of information. If it's not a particular food, maybe it's the way that your grandmother cooked it or your grandfather cooked it. Maybe it's that, you know, the really good food was what we brought in because nobody could cook in our house. But the idea of food as a motivator, as a strategy for a poem is something almost everybody can identify with and find some way to use. So that's what that came from. Then I read you a poem that for years I would never read in public because I didn't think people would get it. And that was the She Named Pamela at Birth Speaks to Me. Because when I was born, before I was adopted, my birth mother named me Pamela Marie. The idea from this poem came from an exercise that is not mine, but I share it with you gladly. People love this exercise. Google your name, and when you find someone with your name, write a poem to that person or imagine that person writing a poem to you. I did not do the exercise. I'm a very bad student. I knew that I had this name, Pamela Marie. So I decided to give Pamela Marie a voice. And I have to tell you, this is the only poem I've ever written in one setting where it is in the book pretty much the way I wrote it first draft. Because once I gave her permission to speak, she was pretty pissed off because she hadn't had a chance to live her life, right? Lynn Thompson got a chance to live a life, but Pamela's like, what about me? And by the way, you ain't all that. I never would have written this poem if I hadn't had that prompt. So you can certainly do it the way it was originally given, which was how most of the people in the class did it, or you can look for other ways in. I didn't read you a poem. I have one, for example, about my mother and father getting together. And I looked up the etymology of her maiden name, which is Hazel with 2 L's. And it had a very interesting etymology, how that name evolved. So that's another way of doing it. If you, I wrote a poem about the basketball player Shumpert, and Shumpert has a very interesting history of that name. What I really wanted to write about was Shumpert's hair, because every time I saw this young man play basketball, he had a different do. I said, okay, I got to write about this guy. But in the meantime, I was using his name to try to get into the story of who he was. So, you know, poets are all about naming. That's the name of the game. And so either use your name. If you have a name like Bob Jones, you'll probably find 5,000 Bob Jones. Write about the fact that there are 5,000 Bob Jones and what's the difference between you and that Bob Jones. But using your name is always an interesting way to go. And then I read for you Ebb Tide, which isn't family in the sense of mother, father, siblings, grandpa, whatever. It's really the relationship between two people who've been together for quite a while. That's a community too, right? It can be 2 people, it can be 1,000 people. But as you're thinking about family and you're thinking about community, don't forget about the community between you and one other individual. It could be your partner, it could be someone at work, it could be someone you get your coffee from every morning. What is that relationship? How do you think about that relationship? So this was one where I really wanted to talk about a couple that were older. They'd been together a long time. They were starting to forget some things. They knew they had to repeat themselves over and over again. What was the relationship? What was the community between the 2 of them? So it's when we talk about this workshop, it's focused on family, which is my favorite thing to write about, or one of my favorite things, but also the idea of community, our writing community, our fellow students, their communities beyond our families that are also rich for the writing about. So I'm hoping with those ideas, you have some good jumping off points. And if there are any questions, Natalie, I'm certainly happy to answer them. And I apologize again for being cut off a little bit.
No problem at all. Please do, if there's anyone who has questions that came up and they didn't get answers, write them in the chat, write them in the Q&A. I have a question or 2 here as well, but please
Sure.
take some time. I love the way that you talk about family and using and not being stopped by the unknown, right? You
Right.
talked about like that first, I love the way you talked about, you kind of put these 2 columns. You wrote about what you knew, and these
Right.
are I know, and these are the things I don't know, and I'm just letting you know what I don't know. And so one of the things that made me think of is the way that sometimes poets have a different relationship to truth, or they get
Right.
caught up in like telling the truth. And so I'm
Right.
curious about like, what do you think about that? When you think about truth in poetry, when you think about like, and obviously it's not like, yeah, so I'm just curious about like, what do you think about truth and telling the truth, and do you think that that's necessary to tell the quote unquote truth? And if so, what does that mean to you? And if not,
Right.
how do you navigate that?
I always tell people we're writing a fiction of a sort. It may have some truth in it, but I think of myself as a storyteller, and I always want to put in enough truth for the reader or the listener to trust me, but I don't feel like everything has to be true in the poem. And one strategy I found for that is what I did with the grandmother poem, and just tell people up front, I'm making this up. But it has a sense of truth about it.
Mhm.
because there's so much, there's probably a lot more that we don't know
Mhm.
about ourselves, let alone anyone else, than we do know. So I think as long as the reader understands, I am not telling you I am writing a biography of Natalie Graham.
Right.
I'm giving you an impression. I'm giving you a kind of truth in how I see her and how I deal with her. So I try to encourage people, we're not writing biographies or histories. We're doing something creative with what we believe we know about the world that we're in.
Mhm. And can you, another thing I know that's common for, just emerging writers trying to figure out, find their way. Can you talk a little bit about, well, I'll ask two questions, but I think they're related. One, can you talk about your process, like your process of writing? Are you consistent? Are you inspired by particular things? Do you do certain things to get going or to edit, like all of those stages of the writing process? So I'll just ask that
Yeah.
one, have a kind of follow up.
I'm wildly inconsistent. I don't necessarily write every day, but kind of every day. But what I am good at is I am a very good listener. And I think every single thing that happens every single day is fodder for a poem. And so I will scribble note there. If you could see this table, there's scribble notes all over the place of, oh, that phrase that I heard. And I think I apologize for not being remembering which poet before me said something like this, that you take a phrase or you smell something or you see something that and you store that away, hopefully by writing it in your journal or whatever you have to write it on the back of a receipt. I got receipts saying, what the heck is this? And you get it home, you can't remember what it was. But I am pretty good about taking all of that in. The revision process I'm devoted to. I told a group the other day, it's not done till you say it's done, and it may never be done. It's your poem. You can fix it for as long as you want. And I'm constantly tweeting them, even after, for example, I had a poem accepted for publication the other day, and I looked at it and I said, oh my God, I can't believe they accepted it with this line. So I will try to persuade them to let me change that. So I'm much more disciplined about revision than I am about sitting down for the initial poem. That just, when it comes, hopefully I can get to some paper and I do it, but I'm not as disciplined arguably as others are.
Okay, and here's a question in the chat. So how do you
Hi,
keep
Cynthia.
oh, how do you keep the span of it in poems about history, family history, from feeling too vast, right? You have generations in your poems. How does it feel so close and intimate? Is there any way you think about that helps you wield it in your poems, wield time?
I mean, it's really in the revision process. Is the poem starting to feel like that particular poem is doing too much? I'm not writing, the Odyssey. So is it too much? Do I need to split it up? I try to really think of it more as snapshots, even though they may be spans of time, that I'm trying to create a snapshot or a relatively small painting, even though the painting may be very detailed where you can see everything in it, like a Diego mural. There may be a lot going on, but it is contained in this structure. I can't say I have a particular rule of thumb because when I go into it, I don't know where I'm going to end up, right? I want to write to something and I don't want to know what that to is. And that's the strength of workshops, having a good friend that you can say, okay, what do you think of this? Someone you trust, whose opinion that you trust and you're willing to actually listen to. Not someone that you're thinking, I don't care what you say, because I don't like your poems anyway. Find that one or two or three persons that you can exchange with, because sometimes it's hard to see it yourself. But in answer to your question, I don't have a hard and fast rule.
Mhm.
I wish I did. If you come up with one, let me know.
I will. I'll be the first to let you know if I come up with anything. When I think of you, I think of somebody who is dedicated to the literary community. And so
Yes.
could you talk a little bit about, the poet laureateship, what it means for folks who don't really know what it means, and then what it means to you, especially because I think of you as for such a long time investing in emerging poets and giving poets a chance and all of that. So what does it mean to you now? And can you just explain a little bit about what it is to folks?
Okay, and Irene, I don't think my family's in the audience. They try to avoid this as much as possible. But the poet laureate position in LA is a joint project of the city and the library. And essentially, they want you to act as an ambassador to the literary community, go into schools, go into senior citizens' homes, go to churches, go to libraries, and spread the good word of poetry. Give a workshop, give a talk, read some poems, that sort of thing. I've started a podcast on the library blog or library website, I guess, where once a week I will present a poet, not myself, some other poet that I think would be a good one for the community to know about. In terms of what it means for me, and I think this is something I'm really proud to be able to say, it's validation and vindication of the fact that I do not have a PhD in literature. I am not as learned as Professor Graham. I don't have an MFA. I am a lawyer by training who woke up one day and said, the thing that's wrong with your life is you're not writing your poetry. I stopped practicing law. I got another job that allowed me more time to really study the craft. So if nothing else, I want people to know whatever it is you want to do, there's more than one way to get to it. You have to be dedicated. You have to work on it. But you can do it without the traditional. It may not be as easy, but it can be done. That's one thing. And the other thing is, whatever you choose to do in your life, you don't have to do it till the day you die. If you wake up one day and said, I really like working with farm animals, figure out how to go work with farm animals. I just think people get stuck. And I know a lot of people said to me when I said, well, I'm not going to be a lawyer, I'm going to be a poet. My mother was like, oh, Jesus. Oh my God, what is wrong with this girl? She's on drugs. I don't know what's going on with her. I did not have anything more than polite response from my family, primarily, who thought it was ridiculous. There's no money in it, And I said, I get it. My family's very practical, as many families are. I said, I don't care. It's not like I'm going to go live on the street somewhere. I have a job. Oh my God. So this feels like vindication that if you really believe in something and really want something and really work at it, you can get it. And then the last thing I'll say in response to something you said, Natalie, was to be a good poet is to be a good poet with your fellow poets. Support them, promote them, encourage them, go to their readings, even if you're not reading. That's what builds community. That's what makes a true difference. Do something for another poet that will benefit you in no way other than they know you were there for them. And I just can't stress enough to beginning poets how kind people were to me every step of the way. And if I can repay that in any way, I try to do it.
Yeah. Well, that's really lovely. I appreciate, hearing from you, being able to ask you questions. I definitely feel like I owe you a debt of gratitude. You were, with me and when my book launched, and that was a special time for me. And so I just appreciate so much being able to share a little bit of time, you being able to share some time with others, because it's so special that you're able to, you have such a great, amazing perspective on poetry and language and community. And so we love listening to that. And so thank you so much, Lynn Thompson.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been such a treat. And to my fellow readers, I hope that Natalie, you'll send me emails so I can just send them notes. They were amazing to hear, and I learned a lot. And I did the prompts too. So I hope to get 3 or 4 poems out of them.
Yes, I think we have a lot to work on. I feel like this is a true workshop.
Good.
Poems, so for sure.
Exactly.
I'm just going to invite Daniel and Lincoln and Beelan to just turn on your cameras and say a wave goodbye. If we can have everyone to say hello, goodbye, and see you.
Everyone.
Thank you so much for sharing this time with us. Thank you to Arena Freitas. We had a poetry class here. I know there were lots of other guests, but we really did appreciate the partnership with the English department and Irena's class and all of you poets. It really was a special time. And so thank you so much.
Well, thank you to you all. It was good to hear everybody, and I hope to see you in the flesh one day soon.
Likewise.
Take care.
Okay.